What's going on, everyone? Good evening. Good evening. Good to be with you for another Left Lens live stream. Bit of an impromptu live stream. So do like the stream as you're coming on. Do hit that subscribe button, but make sure you like the stream and you share it. That's the best way to boost the algorithm. I hope you all are staying cool wherever you are. If you're in the United States, most of the United States is burning up. I know I've been burning up all day. Um, People are dying out here because of it. But I know much of the world right now is going through, or at least big chunks of the world are going through a pretty bad heat wave. So I hope you all are staying safe, staying hydrated, and finding ways to just get off your feet because it can be incredibly dangerous, extreme weather of any kind, but especially this kind of heat. So it's summer though out here, especially in the East Coast of the United States. We do have summers out here in New York. So it's not any surprise really, but of course, these hot days are becoming more and more frequent, more prolonged. So hot days become hot weeks, become really hot months. And of course, climate change has a lot to do with it. Of course, the way that capitalism is destroying the environment has a lot to do with it. But that's not the topic of today's show, although it's all related. Today, I'm going to talk to you and we're going to read this New York Times article today, one of the premier articles out of the Sunday issue. And I thought it was quite illuminating, enlightening, and I think it tells us a lot about the state of the American empire. And after this, at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, so I'm not going to stay on. I'll be on a little more than an hour, but then at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, I will be on call in, and I'm going to share that link with all of you in the chat. Put it in the description of the video after after the live stream is done. But while you're here and while you're coming through, make sure you're hitting that like button. Hitting that like button should share the stream, subscribe to the channel, hit that notifications bell. And of course, I am still building up my subscribers at patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. That's how you can help sustain this show. I'm hoping to get about 7 or 8 more subscribers before the end of the month, which is in a week. So please do come and support the channel. Come and support this show. Come and support all of the work that I'm doing, columns, streams, and otherwise. Patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. So how are you all doing? How are you all doing? I'm just going to say hello real quick to everyone in the chat. Hello, Peace David. Peace Holly. Hello. Hi. Hello, Ghost Start. Good to see you. Hello, Johan from India. Thanks for joining. It's pretty early out there in India, but thank you for joining. Hi, Ware. Good to see you again. Good to see you, Trevin. Or Trevorn, I should say. Hello, Big Teal. Hello. Welcome back. Welcome back. Yes, 2 streams in a row. 2 streams. I don't usually do that. I usually take a day in between at least, but I'm doing 2 in a row this week. So, SG, hello. Hi, yes, the heat is too much. It is too much. My dog is suffering out there when I'm out there with him. But of course, you know how it is with dogs. There's this funny TikTok that I always love to watch about dogs and going to the bathroom. It really doesn't matter how bad the weather is. They're going to stay out for as long as it takes for them to find the exact spot for them to go. So even though I take them out mid-morning or something, it's like almost 90, getting into that 95, 96 area, which it was today. And he's still just finding that spot. He's got to go. We've got to at least walk 10, 15, 20 minutes sometimes in order for him to get that spot. So yes, the heat is too much, and surely my dog puts himself through a lot, I feel like, with it. But hello, Carls. Hello. Hello, Joe. Oh, I said hello to you, Johan, but hello again from India. Hello, Alu. Hello, everyone. Hello, Arif. Hello, Emma. Hi again, Alex. Good to see you again. Hello, RIP Shireen Abu Akla. Hello, Nadia. Hello. Terrified about the recent anti-LGBT agitation and attacks coming from East Harlem and NYC here. Oh, cool. Not too far. Not too far from me. I used to actually intern out there in East Harlem. It's a great neighborhood, but it's been gutted. I feel really I would always feel really terrible there because you could see just the way austerity has really plundered that neighborhood and the way it's neglected, or at least most of it, so neglected, just ridiculous. So most of the working class and poor boroughs have this quality to them where you just see the ways in which austerity and racism work together. But good to see that you are close. So let's see. Who else is out here? Um, Hello, Tuck Yuen. Good to see you. Astro Soul. Hello, hello. Dale Sendero. Hello, hello, hello. All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Keep liking the stream. Keep boosting it. Keep sharing it. Let's see what that ratio is now, actually. I do all of my own producing, by the way. And sometimes I like to do live streams instead of making recordings. I feel more accomplished because making cuts to actual existing video is it's time consuming, but it's also not as fun to be out here with all of you. So that's why sometimes I like to just hop on a stream. It keeps the channel active, and that's basically what not the only thing I'm trying to do here. Obviously, I'm trying to educate out here, and I'm trying to make programming worthwhile. But one of the reasons I like to do live streams sometimes more frequently is to me, I hate doing video editing work. It's hard and it's not that fun. So let's see what the ratio is like here. All right, we're still 25 about short. So if those 25 of you who are watching this, who can like the stream, bring that ratio up 1-to-1. Let's get one like for every viewer, and that usually bumps it. More people see it. I don't know if more people are notified, but I know that there's some issues with the notifications. In any event, though, keep liking the stream. Let's get that to a 1-to-1 like to viewer ratio at the very least, and share it, of course. And the best way to support this, if you're not subscribing here yet to this channel, make sure you're doing that, hitting that notifications bell. But the best way is patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong for any amount you can, small monetary support to keep independent journalism going. There are other links, though, in the description if you prefer Substack or anything else. I don't have a preference, but most people tend to go to Patreon. If you're able to, that's great. I'm looking for about 8 more subscribers, 7 more, I think, before the end of the month. Trying to hit that 500 mark. So, all right, guys. All right. So today I wanted to talk to you all about a really interesting New York Times article. And it's so funny with the New York Times. The New York Times, I mean, it's such a corporate rag, right? It's such a corporate rag. And it's hard for me to take the Times seriously a lot of the times. And we know that it's basically soft peddling State Department, Pentagon propaganda. And this article does it. But I think it's so interesting right now, and I've said it in past streams, is that there's obviously an issue right now with Joe Biden. The establishment is not all in on Joe Biden anymore. And it's not hard to see why. When presidents have low public opinion approval ratings like this, that can happen. That can tend to happen. But I think with Joe Biden, there's something a little different going on as well. It's not just that people don't like him, which a lot of people don't like him across the political spectrum. The left of the Democratic Party, the right of the Democratic Party, if such a thing exists, don't like him. That's much of the electorate doesn't like him. And that's because of all of the calamity, the catastrophes, economic catastrophe, inflation, and then Russia, Ukraine, how that's been handled. And, we can go on and on and on about all the issues, COVID. I mean, it's been one thing after another for Joe Biden. But, Barack Obama struggled with low approval ratings at certain instances of his administration, but Obama was safe. Barack Obama was a safe, quote unquote, moderate. He appeased and appealed to Republicans just enough ideologically and policy wise, more concretely. in order for him to not get this ire. Now, of course, you had some sections of the GOP, much of the GOP, going after him based on race, making this about race and racism, while not saying anything about Obama's most egregious policies. Actually, we at Black Agenda Report talked a lot about how actually the GOP stopped Barack Obama from doing some pretty horrible stuff when it comes to entitlement spending, slashing. I think he wanted to slash $4 trillion from Social Security and Medicare. And the Republicans stopped him on the basis of being racist. And that was a net positive. So that's how twisted things became under Obama. But Obama was never on the hot seat like Joe Biden is on the hot seat. And of course, a lot of that has to do with there weren't the same kind of crises under Barack Obama. Barack Obama's administration was causing crises, certainly wreaking havoc on the planet, on the working class, and of course, on the climate and on the world, right? He was world's people waging endless wars. I mean, he had a abhorrent record. I wrote a 10-part legacy series about this, and I wrote about this frequently. Abhorrent. Expanded everything that Bush did. Everything from the U.S. Africa Command to the bank bailouts. Obama was horrendous, but was never on the hot seat like Joe Biden, in part because he did those things, but also because he didn't have to face this level of crisis. And Barack Obama is not Joe Biden as a person. Joe Biden's having a lot of trouble in terms of his own personal handling of things, whether it's fist bumping the air, a gaffe every time he talks. He is having a lot of issues. And so it doesn't help that he looks incompetent while things are pretty bad right now. And so that's a lot of the reason why Joe Biden's not doing too well. So it's systemic crisis on top of this incompetence and this unlikability, right? He almost has this, he's almost like a more dysfunctional Hillary Clinton, if you can believe that. Hillary Clinton can both be extremely arrogant and stupid at the same time. But Joe Biden has all of those qualities and some unfortunate optics, right? So that's what's happening to Joe Biden, and the corporate media is no longer showering him with praise. Sorry, the Bostonian comes out of me sometimes. No longer showering. Oh my gosh, I can't talk today. No longer giving him praise. No longer heaping praise onto him. Now, there is a lot of trying to protect him based on those who serve him, want to serve him, want to see the Democrats, want to see someone like him remain in power, want to see the forces that he represents remain in power. There's a lot of circling around him trying to protect him. But there's also a lot of kind of hand-wringing and throwing soft jabs. And I would say that the tone around Joe Biden is not one that characterizes a stable government. I wouldn't say that the way that the corporate media talks about Joe Biden represents some kind of stability, but that's what Joe Biden was supposed to be. He was supposed to be the most dependable to the ruling class, not to us. He was supposed to be a dependable servant of the elite to the ruling class, and of course, a brutal oppressor, a brutal facilitator of exploitation and repression of the working class. That's what Joe Biden was supposed to do. He's just not doing it well. And so we find ourselves in the situation where the corporate media is now talking about Joe Biden, not necessarily critically in the way we want to talk about him, but offering up these kind of softballs that I think we should be paying attention to, because it tells us about this moment, offering up these softballs. And let's look at one such softball. Let's go to this New York Times article. Let's read this New York Times article. While you're waiting for me to pull it up, be sure you're liking that stream, liking the video here. Let's like the video. It says we're still about 20 away. Let's see if that's still the case. Yes, we're still about 17 likes away. Let's keep bumping it up. But I'm going to now share this article with all of you. Let's see. I'm going to go into some of the details that they cite too. We're going to get into who they're using as sources, because I always find that very interesting for our purposes. So here we go. On U.S. foreign policy, the new boss acts a lot like the old one. The Biden administration has charted the same course as the Trump administration on strategic priorities like China, the Middle East, and U.S. military deployments. Edward Wong is the author, and Wong says a fist bump in meeting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, tariffs and export controls on China, Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, American troops out of Afghanistan. More than a year and a half into the tenure of President Biden, his administration's approach to strategic priorities is surprisingly consistent with the policies of the Trump administration, former officials and analysts say. Mr. Biden vowed on the campaign trail to break from the paths taken by the previous administration. In some ways, on foreign policy, he has done that. He has repaired alliances, particularly in Western Europe, that Donald J. Trump had weakened with his America First proclamations and criticisms of other nations. In recent months, Mr. Biden's efforts positioned Washington to lead a coalition imposing sanctions against Russia during the war in Ukraine. So here you have the New York Times doing the typical New York Times thing. All of the things that are good that Joe Biden is doing in foreign policy that differentiate him from Donald Trump are really bad, are really worse than what Donald Trump was offering up. And again, let's not act like Donald Trump was a peace president. That's not the point here. The point is that anything that the corporate media praises Joe Biden about in terms of foreign policy is worse than what Donald Trump was doing. That's the real point. The real point is if Joe Biden goes to the right of Donald Trump on foreign policy on any particular issue, like, for example, NATO, Donald Trump was critical of NATO. Now, not always critical of NATO for the reasons I'm critical of NATO, but he did make the point that NATO does suck resources. It was kind of like a nationalist argument, but it wasn't untrue. NATO does demand military spending, and NATO also, has an obsolete role in the world. So Donald Trump raising that was not necessarily a bad thing, even if it wasn't for the same ideas or motives of someone who called them left. But this is bad to the New York Times. And then, of course, it's good. Joe Biden did good that he imposed sanctions against Russia by leading this coalition. And so this coalition is Europe. It's the EU and in the United States. And in that coalition, Europe is now prepping, and there's all sorts of jokes going around online, prepping for a really difficult fall and winter ahead because of the potential energy crisis that is looming. And that energy crisis is due to sanctions. So the United States did successfully get Europe to shoot itself in the foot. It did successfully organize and corral its junior partners, its Western servile states, to do what it wanted to do. And now we've seen the results. We have the euro plummeting. You have political crises. You have basically internal, almost like self-styled regime change operations where all of these Western governments are falling one by one, changing leadership. And then you have also the coming economic crisis, right? Which is probably going to center around energy and probably will mean that there's some really hard decisions that Europe is going to have to make. A lot of European countries, Germany, UK, France, etc. So the article continues saying, Mr. Biden has denounced autocracies, promoted the importance of democracy, and called for global cooperation on issues that include climate change and the coronavirus pandemic. All right, let's go over this. Denounced autocracies. That just means he's hostile toward Russia and China. Doesn't mean anything else. That's not a good thing. He didn't denounce Israel. He didn't denounce Saudi Arabia. He didn't denounce Bahrain and UAE or the other 70% of actual dictatorships using U.S. weapons to oppress people and to wage war, like what's going on in Yemen. He didn't do that. Promoted the importance of democracy and call for global cooperation. Oh, he's promoting democracy, all right. He's promoting the democracy of imperialism and calling for global cooperation on issues like climate change and the pandemic. He is not doing any of it. The Biden administration is not doing any cooperation right now on those things. They can't even pass the Build Back Better bill. There's no cooperation here. Oops. I keep hitting the mic stand. There's no cooperation. None. So in critical areas, the Biden administration has not made substantial breaks, showing how difficult it is in Washington to chart new courses on foreign policy. So difficult, so hard. And that's because there's one master only, and that is the military-industrial complex and finance capital, which basically facilitates and accelerates the influence of the military-industrial complex. That was understood this month when Mr. Biden traveled to Israel and Saudi Arabia, a trip partly aimed at strengthening the closer ties among those states that Trump officials had promoted under the so-called Abraham Accords. In Saudi Arabia, Mr. Biden met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, despite his earlier vow to make the nation a pariah for human rights violations, notably the murder of a Washington Post writer in 2018. Wow, they don't even call him a journalist. They're really cruel to Jamal Khashoggi. As much as I'm not a Khashoggi champion, I do think that just calling the dude a writer, right? I'm wondering if they would treat their whiter journalists the same. I mean, can anyone be called at the Washington Post a journalist? They don't even call him that. A writer. Not to say that there's nothing wrong with being a writer. It's just journalists, the profession comes with obviously more prestige if you are said to be a journalist at the Washington Post. But U.S. intelligence agencies concluded that the prince ordered the brutal killing. Behind the scenes, the United States still provides important support for the Saudi military in the Yemen war, despite Biden's earlier pledge to end that aid because of Saudi airstrikes that killed civilians. So, in a word, Biden hasn't changed nothing with regard to Saudi Arabia. He's still shaking hands. He's still funding that war, that brutal war in Yemen, creating the largest and most cruel humanitarian catastrophe on the planet. That's what he's doing. The policies are converging, says Stephen E. Beijun, Deputy Secretary of State in the Trump administration and national security official under President George W. Bush. Continuity is the norm, even between presidents as different as Trump and Biden. So you see, it's normal for foreign policy to never change. Foreign policy stays the same. It doesn't change. That's what Mr. Beijing, I don't even know if I'm saying this dude's name right. It's probably Baigun or something, Baijin. Maybe it's something more white or something, whatever, more Anglo. But continuity is the norm, says the former Deputy Secretary of State in the Trump administration. Foreign policy don't change. So Trump, for all that America First bluster, no change. And Biden, for all of that build back better, we're going to do differently, stand up to people like Mohammed bin Salman. Nope. Some former officials and analysts praised the consistency, arguing that the Trump administration, despite the deep flaws of the commander-in-chief, properly diagnosed important challenges to American interests and sought to deal with them. Namely, you know what they're talking about. They're talking about China. Others are less sanguine. They say Mr. Biden's choices have compounded problems with American foreign policy and sometimes deviated from the president's stated principles. Senior Democratic lawmakers have criticized his meeting with Prince Mohammed and aid to the Saudi military, for instance, even though the administration officials have promoted a United Nations brokered ceasefire in Yemen. So basically not doing what they said they were going to do. Some people are like, hey, come on, you could have done these simple things to differentiate yourself, and you're not doing it. These aren't even people who are for peace. This is just, look at this, the Atlantic Council. As time goes on, Biden has not lived up to a lot of his campaign promises, and he has stuck with the status quo in the Middle East and on Asia, said Emma Ashford, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. It's bad when you have NATO lecturing you, saying you didn't uphold your promises. All right. When NATO is telling you that you are a hypocrite on foreign policy, you got some issues, because it ain't like NATO is really like, oh man, we got to be for peace. But I think what happens here with someone like this Emma Ashford, someone like or something like the Atlantic Council, is that these imperialists are all about, what are the priorities? Where should we go first? Well, there is an overall agreement on the agenda. There's always an agreement on the overall agenda and on what needs to happen, right? Containing China, weakening Russia, encircling both, making sure to not lose hegemony in the Middle East, continuing sanctions, right? You could get a picture pretty clearly of the unity. There's no, should we do that? There's none of that. There's no pondering. But there's debate about how to do it, when to do it, which thing first, what's a priority, what do we put in the forefront? And the Atlantic Council is not putting Yemen at the forefront. Talk about NATO. This is NATO's think tank. NATO wants Russia, and now they want China too. But they want Russia and Yemen. Yemen isn't the biggest player when it comes to controlling and weakening and overthrowing Russia, right? There's a lot of other theaters in this larger arena of militarism that need to be gotten to. And I think that's why you see here this is mainly about Yemen, it seems like. So both the Trump and Biden administrations have had to grapple with the question of how to maintain America's global dominance at a time when it appears in decline. China has ascended as a counterweight, and Russia has become bolder. So there you go. They're afraid. They're very afraid. China ain't going nowhere. Neither is Russia. So this is about maintaining global dominance. The New York Times says it right out of the horse's mouth. The Trump administration's national security strategy formally reoriented foreign policy toward great power competition with China and Russia and away from prioritizing terrorist groups and other non-state actors. The Biden administration has continued that drive in part because of events like the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now that's BS. That's BS. In part, you had to say it, right? Because this is all about, like I said, there's criticism of Joe Biden here. You're with the status quo, dude, and the status quo is just like Donald Trump, right? There's some attempt to paint Joe Biden as kind of not good enough. But as I said before, like the vultures they are, even Joe Biden's rotting carcass needs to be protected before it can be chewed out, right? What do vultures do? They circle their prey and they wait for it to die, and then they chew them out, then they eat them. I mean, that's what will happen to Joe Biden if the crisis becomes big enough and they need to get rid of him. They'll chew him up and spit him out and say, okay, we need the next person to do our bidding. But now they're just circling around him, and part of the circling around him is, yes, there is some preparing to eat. They're preparing to eat him because he's not doing too well. Most of the establishment, the ruling class, knows this isn't going to go on too much longer, probably. The latest, the most we'll get out of Joe Biden is till 2024, right? I don't think he's going to make it past that. There's very little confidence, at least, in that. And in this protection, you see here just throwing out it's because of the Russia invasion. It's not because of the same reasons Donald Trump was just doing it randomly, great power competition. And now Joe Biden's just continuing because Russia invaded Ukraine. No. The United States was increasing its military budget, ramping up with China and Taiwan, doing the same in Ukraine and doing the same in that region, continuing the military encirclement of Russia, and also economically pursuing these very dangerous sanctions, which is what was happening. The United States did not pull back on the trade war with China. It actually expanded the blacklist. That's what Joe Biden did. More and more Chinese tech companies on this blacklist saying, no, the United States should not invest in them, trying to discourage corporations from doing that, right? The human rights, humanitarian interventionism, that's all continued before Russia's special military operation. Before. But this is what the vultures do in the corporate media. They're protecting their prey. The Biden White House has delayed the release of its own national security strategy, which had been expected early this year. Officials are rewriting it because of the Ukraine war. The final document is still expected to emphasize competition among powerful nations. Mr. Biden has said that China is the greatest competitor to the United States, an assertion that Secretary of State Anthony J. Blinken reiterated in a recent speech, while Russia is the biggest threat to American security and alliances. Some scholars say the tradition of continuity between administrations is a product of the conventional ideas and groupthink arising from the bipartisan foreign policy establishment in Washington, which Ben Rhodes, a deputy national security advisor to Barack Obama, derisively called the blob. He ain't wrong there. There is a blob in Washington. There is. I mean, that's the so-called deep state, right? The foreign policy establishment. They're just in the background, right? CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, these types, the intelligence agencies, the DOD hawks, right? The think tanks, on and on and on. That's who's constructing the foreign policy. And Biden just implements it. Others argue that outside circumstances, including behavior of foreign governments, the sentiments of American voters, and the influence of corporations, leave U.S. leaders with a narrow band of choices. There's a lot of gravitational pull that brings the policies to the same place, Mr. Biagin said. I'm going to pronounce his name differently every time. It's still the same issues. It's still the same world. We have largely the same tools with which to influence others and to get the same outcomes, and it's still the same America. In committing to withdraw troops from Afghanistan, Biden and Trump were responding to the will of most Americans who had grown weary of 2 decades of war. For Mr. Biden, the move also was a chance to address unfinished business. As vice president, he had advocated bringing troops home in line with Mr. Obama's desire to wind down the forever wars, but he was opposed by U.S. generals insisting on a presence in Afghanistan. Now, that's also BS. That's also BS. Just a reminder, that's BS. Because Barack Obama actually instituted a surge in his first term, a troop surge, and escalated the war in Afghanistan. And he didn't want to end forever wars. He just wanted to end, quote unquote, dumb wars. That doesn't mean that forever wars are necessarily dumb. Okay. But he did want an eventual drawdown of these. That's why it took so long. That's why it didn't happen under Obama. He didn't necessarily want it to happen then. He did want this transition, though, from a war on terror-centered focus to a more great power focus, to a focus that's heavier on Russia and China. That was what Barack Obama wanted, and he did successfully institute that while also carrying forward the objectives of Bush in the war on terror as well, because the war on terror also had its sights Syria and Iran. And while Barack Obama had the JPCOA, the Iran deal, as kind of like a signature, sanctions on Iran were oftentimes strengthened under Obama, but also the military provocations and involvement in Syria in order to weaken Iran and weaken Russia. I mean, all of that was a big deal. And so it's BS to say that Biden was all for pulling out. It's not true. Despite the chaotic withdrawal last August as the Taliban took over the country, polls have shown most Americans supported ending U.S. military involvement there. Trump and Biden have advocated a smaller U.S. military presence in conflict regions, but both hit limits to that thinking. Joe Biden has sent more American troops to Europe since Russia's invasion of Ukraine and to Somalia, reversing a Trump-era withdrawal. So there you have Biden adding on, right? Reversing Donald Trump's, not anti-interventionism, but just drawing down in certain areas, right? The United States did draw down slightly on the African continent through the removal of troops in Somalia. Now they're going back, hundreds of them. U.S. troops remain in Iraq and Syria. So there you have the admission. We still have troops there. We're still occupying those countries. A third of Syria is occupied. There's deep skepticism of the war on terror by senior members of the Biden administration, said Bryant Finucane, a senior advisor at International Crisis Group who worked on military issues as a lawyer at the State Department. See these sources here? These are all advisors of things like the International Crisis Group, which is really a cutout of the State Department, and military. And then he worked for the State Department himself. Nevertheless, they're not willing yet to undertake broad structural reform to dial back war or the war. Mr. Finucane said reform would include repealing the 2001 war authorization that Congress gave the executive branch after the attacks on 9/11. Even if Biden doesn't take affirmative steps to further stretch the scope of the 2001 authorization of use of military force, as long as it remains on the books, it can be used by future administrations, he said, referring to the authorization, and other officials can extend the war on terror. On the most pressing Middle East issue, Iran and its nuclear program, Joe Biden has taken a different tack than Donald Trump. The administration has been negotiating with Tehran a return to an Obama-era nuclear agreement that Donald Trump dismantled, which led to Iran's accelerating its uranium enrichment. But the talks have hit an impasse, and Joe Biden has said he would stick with one of Donald Trump's, major actions against the Iranian military, the designation of its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization, despite that being an obstacle to a new agreement. So there you have it again. Joe Biden is literally going along with Donald Trump. He says, I want to be a part of the Iran deal again. I want to continue to milk Barack Obama's legacy, get back the JPCOA Iran deal, and make that part of my foreign policy legacy. But he's willing to go further than even Obama and name the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, namely the Iranian military, a terrorist organization. Seems like a bad idea, but that's how hawkish Joe Biden is. China policy stands out as the most vivid example of continuity between the two administrations. China, the most visible example of continuity. That's important. The State Department has kept a Trump-era genocide designation on China for its repression of Uyghur Muslims. So I want to just put an asterisk there. The alleged genocide and now there's a designation on China that Trump put in. And Biden officials have continued to send U.S. naval ships through the Taiwan Strait and shape weapons sales to Taiwan to try to deter a potential invasion of China. So there you go. Every time the New York Times is being critical of Biden, they're also adding in a little thing out there to say it's kind of justified, right? Because these weapons are to deter China. Doesn't matter how much China says it's for peaceful reunification. Doesn't matter that the joint communique of 1982 says the United States is going to draw down its arms sales and won't send more arms to Taiwan than the year prior and will work toward their eventual end. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. It doesn't matter that the United States and its allies send spy planes and warships in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. You know, that there were rumors of special operations forces in Taiwan working with Taiwan. That doesn't matter. It's justified because China's going to invade, right? China's going to invade. It's this hyping China as the aggressor. And so Biden's doing the same thing. He's doing the same thing, hyping the human rights question as if the United States has any leg to stand on human rights, as if there's any evidence of these egregious and just ridiculous claims of so-called genocide. Doesn't matter that the Uyghur population has grown by more than a quarter over the last decade. It doesn't matter if life expectancy and all the social indicators, poverty, etc., have continued to improve for Uyghur Muslims and Uyghur people and all the ethnic groups in China. It doesn't matter because Biden is going to say it's a genocide, it's aggression. We're going to put on more sanctions. So they didn't even talk about the sanctions put on for that. The Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Those are broad sanctions. Those are it's hurting China. It's hurting the world. It's increasing inflation. And that's Joe Biden escalating, going further than Donald Trump. Most controversially, Mr. Biden has kept Trump-era tariffs on China, despite the fact that some economists and several top U.S. officials, including the Treasury Secretary herself, Janet Yellen, question their purpose and impact. Biden and his political aides are keenly aware of rising anti-free trade sentiment in the United States that Trump capitalized on to marshal votes. That awareness led Mr. Joe Biden to shy away from trying to re-enter the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a trade agreement among 12 Pacific Rim nations that Obama helped organize and strengthen economic competition against China, but Mr. Donald Trump and progressive Democrats rejected. So there you go. The New York Times is willing to say that the TPP was about China. It says strengthen economic competition. That just means economic strangulation. It didn't work, and the U.S. still is out of it. Biden won't go back. Analysts say Washington needs to offer Asian nations better trade agreements and market access with the United States if it wants to counter China's economic influence. I covered this with the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. The United States refuses to open up its market. The United States only wants market access for itself. It's not going to allow, right, certain kinds of import-export deals to happen. It's not going to allow for negotiations. It's not going to allow corporations from South Korea, Japan, from China, from anywhere to come in and negotiate independently with the U.S. market, basically U.S. corporations. It's not going to allow that to happen because it doesn't want to see these corporations get a fair shake and potentially continue what is inevitable. I mean, this is just inevitable. The weakening of the U.S. economy. What's happening is that the United States capitalist economy is weakening. It continues to weaken, and it's shrinking. And so this is all trying to protect it from shrinking by not offering any market access at all to the United States. It's basically what the United States wants to do, right? It's not, okay, this is a free trade agreement, so we get access to your market, you get access to ours. It doesn't work like that. The United States calls the shots. Analysts say neither the Trump nor Biden administrations have a trade and economic policy that the Asian friends of the U.S. have been pleading for to help reduce their reliance on China, said Corey Shackey, and we're going to get into her, the director of foreign and defense policy at the American Enterprise Institute. Both because she says her conclusion deserves more attention on her because the others are more clear on who they are. The American Enterprise Institute is so often cited. I feel like every other New York Times article I've read, or every New York Times article I've read in the last month on foreign policy has the American Enterprise Institute cited. Both Biden and Trump administrations are to some extent over militarizing the China problem because they can't figure out the economic piece. That's kind of insightful. That's kind of insightful. The United States can't compete. That's a nice way of saying the United States just got nothing to offer. So they're just going to be more aggressive toward China so they can peel off allies, make any country that has any conflict with China, right? Any disagreements, which there are. I mean, there are disagreements with Japan, South Korea. This isn't a secret. They're different systems. They have complicated histories. And for one, right, China fought on the side of the DPRK during the Korean War. So there are a lot of oligarchs in the south of the DMZ. Probably don't like China that much, gotta say. Japan, right, former colonizers, fascistic invaders of China, killed a lot of people. Still don't see eye to eye all the time. But economically, China has all this to offer. And, they're in the free trade agreement, the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Bilateral relations are pretty strong regardless. So the United States can't really undermine that. So to continue with the article, it says it's in Europe that Joe Biden has set himself apart from Trump. The Trump administration was at times contradictory on Europe and Russia. While Trump praised Vladimir Putin of Russia, criticized the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and withheld military aid to Ukraine for domestic political gain, some officials under him worked in the opposite direction. In contrast, Biden and his aides have uniformly reaffirmed the importance of transatlantic alliances, NATO, which has helped them coordinate sanctions and weapon shipments to oppose Russia and Ukraine. So Donald Trump, actually, his administration escalated with Russia. Things got worse in terms of policy toward Russia. Things got more aggressive. The withdrawal of the INF treaty, the continued military encirclement, the constant undermining of all, right, the Helsinki talks were completely undermined. Sanctions were continued, if not increased, on Russia during that time. So this is not necessary. This is half true. They don't want to associate that with Donald Trump because that would make Trump look even less different than Biden. And so they want to maintain some differentiation here. But the New York Times is saying it's a good thing that Joe Biden has gone even further by reaffirming NATO verbally and rhetorically while sending more weapons and putting on more sanctions onto Russia. It's a good thing. So Center for European Analysis, Alina Polyakova, says there's no question in my mind that words and politics matter. If allies don't trust the U.S., will uphold Article 5 of NATO and come to an ally's defense, it doesn't matter how much you invest. Ultimately, the biggest contrast between the presidents and perhaps the aspect most closely watched by America's allies and adversaries lies in their views of democracy. Trump complimented autocrats and broke with democratic traditions well before the insurrection. See, look at this. They got to bring up January 6, 2021. That congressional investigators argue he organized. Biden has placed promotion of democracy at the center, at the ideological center of his foreign policy. In December, he welcomed officials from more than 100 countries to a summit for democracy, which was a flop, a boring, uninspiring flop, an incredibly insulting flop where you had Nathan Law and you had representatives from Taiwan speak. You had all of these incredible provocations, like escalations at this dumb and stupid and boring summit. I watched it. I wanted to cry. It was so early in the morning. I watched it. I did a little report on it. I can't believe I watched it. It was one of the most cruel things you could do. Truly could be an act of torture. Truly to watch that Summit for Democracy. You had Jacinda Ardern, that New Zealand PM. You had her saber rattling toward China. Oh, we need a digital, technical, blah, blah space in order to fight cyber from China and Russia. You had all of this really soft pedaling Cold War nonsense in order to frame the United States and its allies as democracies, right? When in fact they're just democracies for the rich and for the militarists. That's not democracy. That's minority rule. That's what the United States was founded upon, and now it's even worse. Now things have only gotten worse because of all the rollbacks of all the gains that people have made since the United States' slaveocracy and genocidal colonialist state was established. American democracy, said Miss Jackie. Oh, she's back. This is why I wanted to talk about Miss Jackie. She's back. American democracy is the magnetic soft power of the United States. We are different and better than the forces we are contesting against the international order. That is how this article closes. So when I said that the corporate media are vultures, that they see Joe Biden as a rotting carcass that has not yet died. They see him as that, and a very useful rotting carcass. He probably was one of them. He's kind of like a vulture that's dying, and the vultures are just waiting. They're waiting to just eat. They want to eat him, but he's also one of them. So you see what's happening here. They're circling around him, criticizing him. Oh yeah, he broke some promises, but Ms. Shackey from the American Enterprise Institute says we're better. We are better than the forces we are contesting in the international order and different. That's American exceptionalism on steroids. That is incredible. That hubris, that's imperialist hubris that is just flat out. That's just flat out racism. That's flat out imperialist ideology. And that's how the New York Times decides to end this article, this supposedly critical article. So you see, whenever you read the corporate media, it never is truly all critical. It is still imperial propaganda. It is the empire's propaganda. And so I want to show you, I'm just going to remove this because I want to show you who Miss Shackey is. What is the American Enterprise Institute? It's a conservative think tank. And while I'm pulling up exactly who's behind this think tank, I want you all to continue to like this stream. Please do hit the like button. I'm going to look at this ratio here because we got a good number of viewers. It's really great to see all of you. But we're still about 57. So those of you who have not liked this stream, please do. We can bring this viewer count even further up. That would be great. Of course, you can support this channel. Dropping a super chat is great. You can subscribe to the channel. You can share the video. But the best way to do it is patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. Become a subscriber. Support this show and all of my work, the columns and streams. I'm looking for about 7 more subscribers before the end of the month to help keep this show sustainable. So I appreciate it. But I want to show you what the American Enterprise Institute really is, right? Who dictates what the American Enterprise Institute does? What Miss Shackey, what does she do? Who is Miss Shackey? Well, we'll get to her. But let's just look at the American Enterprise Institute. This is the board of trustees who governs the institution. Aha, look at that. The Carlyle Group. What's the Carlyle Group? It's a deeply connected financial monopoly, private equity capital monopoly tied to Saudi Arabia. So there you have it. The board of trustees, Daniel Danello, the chairman. He's the co-founder and chairman emeritus of the Carlyle Group. And then you just have AQR, Capital Management, Brewing Company, Coors. You have Peter Coors of, you all remember the whole beer industry is just rife with just genocide in Central America, right? Crow Holdings, Eagle Capital Management, Freedom Trust, the WinQuest Group, the American Enterprise Institute themselves. The president is Robert Doar. So just Wall Street, hedge funds, big monopolies, American Express. This is who is represented by the American Enterprise Institute. It's the capitalist class. It is a think tank of the capitalist class, and it's considered conservative. Also the Honorable Dick Cheney. So it's not just conservative, it is neoconservative. It is neoconservative. So I want to show you before a friend of the show, Ben Norton, did talk about the Carlyle Group a little bit in a former Gray Zone article when he was at the Gray Zone. So a friend of the show talked about, I just want to show you in an article that he wrote about Wall Street. Obama tells Wall Street to thank him for making them so much money at an elite gala. This was 2018. I'm just going to search his little, I think it was good. He said, the day before, so former George H.W. Bush visited a hotel for the annual investor conference of the So this is an investor conference. The Carlyle Group, a world-leading private equity company based in D.C., is closely linked to Saudi Arabia. Its co-founder, David Rubenstein, quipped in an op-ed in the Washington Post in 2003 that the Carlyle Group, quote, has developed a reputation as the CIA of the business world, omnipresent, powerful, a little sinister. The bin Laden family invested millions of dollars in the corporation, the Carlyle Group, and James Baker served as a senior counselor along with George H.W. Bush as an advisor. So I think someone in the chat said Carlyle Group equals the Bush family. That is not that far off. That is not far off. The Carlyle Group is an instrument of neoconservatism, and that's where Shacky works. But who is Miss Shacky? So Miss Shacky, who's constantly cited by the New York Times, Corey Shacky, she might be, and I'm sounding really Boston here. I can't help it. I'm really sounding like I'm from the Boston area. But Miss Corey Shacky, who is she? There she is. That's what she looks like. This is her little profile. Corey Shacky is she's not impartial. She's been around the block a little bit. Her research areas are national security and NATO. But let's go down, because I'm not going to read this because this is very vague, right? They won't tell you where in the U.S. State Department, where at the Department of Defense, where at the National Security Council at the White House. I'll tell you, though. It's down here in her kind of like CV, a very small CV here. So let's just go from the bottom. The U.S. Department of Defense from 94 to 96 as a special assistant to the Secretary of Strategy and Requirements Office of the Secretary of Defense. 94, and then the NATO Desk Officer, Director of Strategic Plans and Policy at Joint Staff, 90 to 94. So she worked for HW and she worked for Clinton. Okay. So she worked for the Clinton Bush neoconservative militarists. That's what she did. And then she did all this fellow stuff. Okay. So she did some fellow stuff. She was a fellow. That's what these think tankers do. They become fellows, meaning they just become overpaid messengers of the empire. They just squawk for the empire. But then she was on the National Security Council, Director of Defense Strategy and Requirements, 2002, 2005. What happened then? What happened while she was part of the strategy and requirements at the National Security Council of George W. Bush? Oh, right, the invasion of Iraq. So she was obviously in those rooms. She was obviously writing policy. She was obviously big in she was big in the invasion of Iraq. That's who she was. She's been everywhere. She's been in the DOD to begin in the 90s. Then she was sitting on the National Security Council with George W. Bush as his administration was invading Iraq, killing people, bombing people, destroying that country. Then she goes to the Department of State at the end of the Bush administration, the last year during the beginning of the crisis. Oh, and then she starts working senior policy advisor for McCain Palin. See where, and then she's at the Hoover Institute, and then where she was, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, another imperialist think tank, and now she's with the American Enterprise Institute, literally shilling for finance capitals, imperialist wars. Literally, the Corey Shacky is the spitting image of what it means to be a servant of the empire, a servant of what Lenin was talking about with imperialism, serving the very monopolies and finance capitalist institutions that are driving endless wars, that are driving the redivision of the world, what I call now the attempt to shape how the world is governed, because the world has been divided already. That process was completed, right, by the colonialists, by the imperialists, and then those who resisted. So Shaki is a spitting image of what it means to be a servant of that imperialist process. And that's like the principal source for the New York Times on all things foreign policy. When I was on with um uh when I was on talking about the New York Times with Amira Bahia, when I was on with her talking about a New York Times article where they talk about his trip to Saudi Arabia, Biden's trip to Saudi Arabia being about China and Russia, she was also in that. Miss Shaki is constantly being cited by the New York Times because the American Enterprise Institute is obviously a big deal to the New York Times. Why? Well, because the New York Times is just a rag of finance capital. It's just a rag of the military industrial complex. And they can't get anyone else. They just constantly cite the State Department, DOD, reps from there. And then you have someone like Shaki from this think tank, American Enterprise Institute, that's literally soft pedaling neoconservatism and really hard pedaling, because that last sentence, we are better, we are different and better than who we are challenging in this international order, is incredibly problematic. I mean, that's just imperialist propaganda unhinged. That's just imperialism on steroids and racism on steroids. No, the United States is not better than Russia and China. No, it's not. Why is it not? Well, because Russia and China, no matter what Russia is doing with Ukraine, no matter what China is doing right now, none of them have done what the United States has done. None of them ever will. I'll put all the little crumbs I have on that. I don't have much, but I'll put everything. Everything. I'll bet it all that China and Russia never do what the United States has done. Ever. Why? Because I know China's history, I know Russia's history. Russia, long struggle against Tsarism, autocracy, formation of the Soviet Union for more than 70 years, now on a different path in the United States. No matter what you think about the Ukraine crisis, this stream isn't about that today. But I don't think that the Ukraine crisis is anything like U.S. wars. Even with that said, no matter what you think of the Ukraine crisis, it's nothing like what the United States has done in its wars. China has never even been engaged in something like that yet. The U.S. is trying to provoke it with Taiwan. But China has no record of this. None. Not even, don't even try to compare China and Vietnam's border dispute in 79. Nothing like what has occurred. I mean, that was a several week clash. People died. Not great. It wasn't a great moment for either country, but nothing compared to what the United States has done. And China has no interest in building up that kind of capacity. If you've ever been to China, if you know anything about China, you know that everything when it comes to military is about the country. It has nothing to do with going outward with the military. None. So every time the U.S. complains about, oh, U.S. China sailing the South China Sea is the South China Sea. No one complains when the United States is sailing outside of California. No one's complaining when the United States is, conducting drills, on its borders, on its coastlines. No one complains about that in the United States. But when China's in the South China Sea, it's a problem. I've never heard about China sailing out, though, to the coasts of the United States. Never heard of Chinese warships outside of California. But yet, the United States is always sailing warships outside of the Taiwan Strait, right at the Taiwan Straits. Which, if you look at Taiwan, there's China, or it's the other way around. But sailing through there is a war provocation. But it's not a problem to the New York Times because they got Miss Shaki out there. They got Miss Shaki peddling neoconservatism because the New York Times is a neoconservative rag. And even in their criticisms of Biden, they expose themselves as a neoconservative rag. A rag for imperialism, for endless war. But the interesting thing here is that Biden's in trouble. And so they have to, they're trying to hash out these problems. They're trying to hash them out, right? They're just going through so many issues right now, and they can't control it. So they can't, we have to remember this is about how uncontrollable this imperialist system is right now. It's ungovernable. It can only go in one direction. And while not everyone loves that direction, even in the establishment, they're still going to go there. Do you think that the capitalist class as a whole wants a war with China, an extremely aggressive war? No way. You even had the Wall Street Journal posting a letter from a lot of different corporations saying, yeah, let's dial it back a bit. Biden, come on, stop that. Doesn't matter. They know, everyone knows in the establishment where that is going, where U.S. provocations are going. The only people that don't know really is people outside of the establishment. They've been kept bamboozled, propagandized. And the same goes for Russia. So I want to pivot. I don't think I actually have time to read this article today. I was going to pivot to a Palestine. Let's actually just read one section of this, okay? So there's an article. I'm going to read one section of it, and I'm going to do it quick. It's about Palestine because I wanted to cover this. It's in Mondoise, which sometimes publishes good things. I know it's a little bit more on the, it can be left, it can be also on the moderate side sometimes. Mondoise says, repeating the colonial mistakes of the past, President Biden, how many civilians must die to prove U.S. friendship to apartheid Israel? I'm not going to read the beginning of it because it's all about the visits, but I'm going to read the same as Trump to see what they say. So this was written by Terry Wall, who is from Ramallah, I believe, right? Board member for the American Federation of Ramallah, a Palestinian American. All right. Same as Trump. So this author says the language President Biden and Secretary of State Antony Blinken used regarding Israel-Palestine may lead people to believe that our government is a champion of the oppressed, but the details tell another story. Biden is abiding by the same destructive and one-sided policy that Donald Trump advocated to protect Israel and stifle the lives of Palestinian people under Israeli occupation. In preparation for his visit to the Middle East, the president and his top diplomats talked about the desire to address the issues of human rights wherever they visit in the region, yet they sidestepped any language about the oppression of Palestinians. They try to silence and whitewash any discussion about Israel's intentional assassination of American Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh and other journalists. Furthermore, they bragged about their ironclad support of Israel by increasing their annual stipend to over $4 billion a year at a time when our own U.S. economy and people are suffering. Instead of pushing for a viable two-state solution, the U.S. policy since 1993, he announced that the time is not ripe for talk. Yet he did not find any irony in his action by rewarding Israel with more funds despite their continuous building of illegal settlements, their indiscriminate human rights violations of mostly unarmed civilian population living under their occupation, and discrimination against American citizens when they travel to their Palestinian homeland. In addition, standing shoulder to shoulder with Israel's Prime Minister Yair Lapid, Biden demonized the Palestinians' nonviolent BDS movement and adopted the dangerous practice of labeling anyone who dare to point out the human rights violations of Palestinians at the hand of Israel as anti-Semites. This counterproductive accusation only serves to silence those critical of Israel's apartheid policies and will undermine calls to challenge genuine instances of anti-Semitism. Through many meetings with our American administration officials, we have come to the conclusion that President Joe Biden's policies regarding Palestinian issues resemble the destructive policies of Trump. And during his visit, we realized that the policy is one and the same as dictated by Benjamin Netanyahu. So this author lays it out quite nicely. I think that Joe Biden is actually more effective here. I think what Joe Biden did on his trip was just absolutely insulting. I mean, he did just go after the left. He went after those who are critical of Israel. He just went after them. So, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised by this. But I think this article does a good job by saying that, yeah, he's no different. And on his trip, he completely ignored the Palestinian issue. This is what people actually care about this. more than 60% of Democrats want the U.S. and want Democrats to support Palestine more. More than 90% of Democrats don't even view Israel as an ally. There is a sea change happening with the world, with public opinion about Israel, and Joe Biden is behind that. Joe Biden defended funding the Iron Dome, defended funding Israel, and he basically said he was going to do more of it. He was, I mean, listening to him versus Donald Trump, there's no difference on this question in many instances other than rhetoric. Oops, almost dropped my phone. Other than rhetoric. That's it. It's all rhetoric. That's the only difference. Policy wise, things are staying the same. And Israel right now is conducting an assault. I saw that there was some more attacks on Palestinians today. And right after his trip, there was a bombing of Gaza. I mean, it did. I don't know if it's turned into an all-out siege just yet, but we know that that's what happens. That's what happens. So there's no accountability. There never was going to be, right, from Joe Biden on the Palestine question. And Palestine gets a lot of attention from the left now, more so than probably any other foreign policy issue, right? Any other question of imperialism. Palestine is number one. Young people, progressives, leftists, there is a growing consensus about Palestine, about how Palestine deserves self-determination. It's not a lot of agreement about how that is. I think there's a lot more supporters of two-state solution. I, for one, am not a supporter of a two-state solution because I do not think that Israel is a is an actor that can do it. It is not a good faith actor. So you actually need one. I think you need one government, and I think that Palestine, this is controversial, but I do think that Palestine and Palestinians deserve to have more power over that government. I really dislike this idea that Zionists who are armed to the teeth can remain in the same position they're in with just an equal player on the other side, maybe in a joint government. I even think that is naive. Israel is not going to give up its colonial possessions. It's not going to abide by any UN agreement. It's not going to allow the right of return. It's not going to do these things. So that's why I take a different position than most people, even on the left. Even, and I know that the situation is dire. So I am for, I mean, with Palestine, with most questions, I am for whatever will improve the situation. And if you got to test out some things and try it. But Israel's not even letting that happen. No matter how much pressure is put on Israel, I doubt it's ever going to allow a real two-state solution to operate. I mean, it's kind of naive in a lot of ways to think that that would happen. And in my opinion, I do think that the United States' situation is going to have to change a lot for things with Palestine to change, because the United States is going to have to, it's going to have to change its policy on Israel. And the only way Israel, the United States changes its policy on Israel is if Israel has a lot less influence over U.S. foreign policy and vice versa. And the only way that happens is if the character of the U.S. government changes. So the situation with Palestine is quite complex. It's not just okay, we're just going to do some reorganization. We're going to have the UN more involved. It's not like that. And it never is like that. It's never like that because the U.S. exerts such a dominant influence over world affairs and world politics that Palestine's freedom and self-determination is really tied to how much the American empire can be weakened and what kind of struggle we can build and develop to weaken it. So all efforts, the BDS and fighting for a Palestinian self-determination, all those efforts should be supported with also the understanding that the American empire must be fought at a broad level. We can't really address the Palestine question if the American empire goes on the way it's going on, if it's able to wage endless wars and use Israel as a beachhead of its imperialist ambitions, if it's going to continue to be this colonialist state, and it's not a vassal state, but it is a colonialist ally. If it's able to operate like that, it's mainly because the United States allows it to. And the United States would never undermine Israel's politically, right? It would never undermine Israel politically because Israel serves such an important function. So that's why Israel has all of this influence, because Israel has such an important strategic function for the US's wars in that region against the Arab world, the Muslim world, right? In the cradle of civilization, Israel sits there as a colonialist entity waging acts of aggression on, it was just bombing Damascus again and bombed Syria hundreds of times a year, right? More than 100 times a year. Almost at once every 3-4 days. That's what Syria has to deal with. Israel has assassinated Iranian scientists. Israel has been a terrorist state in the whole region and has its own imperialist ambitions. So we cannot expect Israel to just bow down, even with the wrath. I think that the Palestinian people can and will wage and continue to build and wage a valiant resistance movement. And with allies, it could have some success. But Israel's role in that region is a lot bigger and is a lot more broad than even what even the significance of the Palestinian struggle portends. So it's a dialectic. Palestine must be put at the forefront, as well as all of the various connections that must be made, all of the various connections it has to the larger struggle against imperialism. That's a big gap in the United States and the West. A lot of this Palestinian solidarity movement does not view it that way and does not behave in that way. A lot of the Palestinian solidarity movement, unfortunately, has been taken by some forces who, there is divisions, and there are some forces who go along with imperialist propaganda on China or imperialist propaganda on Syria or whatever it is. You've seen this in the Palestinian solidarity movement, I'm sure, if you've been able to pay attention, right? I've been to rallies where there's the Uyghur separatist flag, right? The so-called East Turkestan flag waving there. That's the flag of the NED vassals, the so-called Uyghur exile community, which is almost an appendage of the U.S. government at this point. Why is that there at a Palestinian solidarity rally? The same thing goes with the the French mandate flag. I've seen that flying around at Palestinian solidarity rallies of Syrian French mandate flag. That's a colonialist flag. That's an imperialist flag. I shouldn't be. I remember I have a friend, Egyptian, very cool person. I'll protect her name. But I remember when ISO was still an organization, she went up. They were flyering. This was during, I believe, Protective Edge, 2014. I went to a rally with her, and she she was handed a flyer by ISO. Hey, come to our rally, and the French mandate flag was all over it. The 3-star flag for Syria. And that was the flag being waved around by Free Syrian Army and by all the jihadists and the reactionaries wanting to overthrow the Syrian government, supported by the U.S. and its allies, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. She went back up to her after looking at the flyer and was like, "Do you know what this flag is?" And she gave her a lecture. And this was a white, surprise, white former ISO, now I believe ISO activist, and she almost made her cry. I was very happy about that. I was like, wow, this is great. I mean, this is what kind of needs to happen, right? We need to definitely put those pro-imperialist forces on the left in their place, and that's what she did quite well. And so you'll see that at Palestinian solidarity rallies, though. You'll see it. I don't know if you all have seen it. I've seen it. I've been troubled by it. I've tried to approach it. Although the last time I was at a solidarity rally during the latest siege of Gaza, it was so crowded I couldn't get to the person holding the flag. I really wanted to go up to them and be like, "Hey, where'd you get that East Turkestan flag?" But I couldn't even get there. There's so many barricades. It was impossible. So with that said, though, that ends the content portion of this. I do have to go in about 5 minutes. All right. I'm going to be on call-in, though. Let me actually send you that link. I'm going to be on call-in, probably 6:30, 6:35. It's scheduled for 6:30, but I need to take a little bit of a break. I'm going to feed my dog. But I'm going to send you the link to the Post Left Lens show. I'm going to try to do this a little bit more. So come to call and ask some questions. I'm not going to have really a robust program here. There's the link there. And I definitely want to okay. I hope I'm still live. I'm trying to put this in the description as well, the video. So I'm going to put the call in right under right at the bottom at 6:30 p.m. So come through, ask questions, make comments. I do keep them at 2 minutes. So this one will probably be 45 minutes. Okay, 45 minutes. I have I'm gonna be going out. I've actually with a Patreon subscriber was able they live close to me, able to connect with them. That's been great. So I gotta go at like I gotta eat dinner, so I'm gonna go at like after an hour tops from Colin. So come through, talk, ask questions, all that good stuff. All right. So yeah, good stuff today, guys. Thanks for coming out. This was a good stream. This is a good time to stream. Obviously, I feel like every time I come out on a Sunday late afternoon, I get boosted a little bit more. So I like to see that. I like to see more viewers. Please do continue to like it though. Like this stream, hit that notifications bell. I think we're above, the ratio is good now though, so I'm not too worried about the ratio anymore. Yeah, so we've surpassed now the 1-to-1 more likes than viewers. But you can continue to share it, but the best thing you can do is subscribe on Patreon. I'm looking for 7 more subscribers. I'm not just looking. I mean, this is going to help me keep this show sustainable. That's not hyperbole. That's not a lie. This is all to just keep me able to do this on even on a part-time basis, which is basically what I'm doing now. I do part-time. So to even just do this on a part-time basis, it is very much required that this show and all my work, is supported by people like you who come out here and who find this work useful and really make it something worthwhile to do. To have people who are willing to pledge that support. So I really appreciate all of you who are already doing that. All of you who can't do that but come out here every time anyway. And yeah, no, this was great, guys. Appreciate you coming out. I'll see you maybe in like 10-15 minutes. Peace out. Keep liking this, keep sharing this video. It'll be on playback if you came here late. And then yes, subscribe patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. Best way to support. There's more links in the description. Looking for 7 more subscribers before the end of this month to help keep this work sustainable. Salute everyone. I will be back not tomorrow, probably sometime in the middle of the week, and I'm going to try to work on some guests as well, but it might just be me again, but I'm going to try to work on some guests as well. Salute everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.